The first cool hush of the Big Sur kelp forest reaches you before the surface has fully closed above us, and tonight we drift down through its brown gold towers together. Let your breathing soften, because this coast keeps its own slow time, and there is nowhere in it that asks you to hurry. Above you, the last air is silver and trembling, broken into small moving pieces by the swell, while below you the kelp rises from hidden rock like a quiet forest growing upward into blue water. The Big Sur kelp forest is not still in the way stone is still, and not restless in the way waves are restless, but something between the two, a place that leans and returns, bends and lifts, and carries the long patience of the Pacific in every ribbon of its leaves. You feel the water close around your shoulders as a cool, even weight, not pressing sharply, only reminding you that the world has changed its texture. Sound becomes rounder here, the wind and shore fade into a muffled breathing above us, and the sea begins to speak in lower tones. We stay near the edge of the light at first, where the surface is still bright enough to scatter gold over the floating canopies. Each blade of giant kelp drifts in the slow surge, and you can almost feel that movement in your own body, as though the forest is teaching your muscles how to let go. The long stipes climb from the rocky floor toward the sun, held upright by small gas-filled floats that shine softly when the light catches them. They are simple things, those little bladders of air, but they lift an entire world into shape. Because of them, the kelp can rise through the cold water, making shade, shelter, food, and lanes of green-brown twilight, where fish can move without hurry. You notice the color first, because color changes gently underwater. The surface keeps its pale silver, then the blue grows deeper, and the kelp becomes amber, olive, tobacco, and dark honey as we drift beneath its canopy. Sunlight filters through the long blades in loose, shifting bands, and each band touches your hands, then leaves them. The water smells faintly of salt and mineral cold. If you imagine that smell carried inside the breath you took before we entered, it has the clean scent of tide pools at evening, of wet rock cooling after sun, of old seaweed laid softly along the shore. Nothing here feels empty. Even the dim spaces seem inhabited by waiting. Big Sur's coast is steep and serious above us, though we don't need to look back at it now. The mountains rise almost directly from the Pacific, their slopes folded with chaparral, redwood canyons, and stone that has been lifted, broken, and shaped by deep forces over long ages. Beneath the water, that same ruggedness continues. The seafloor does not become plain all at once. It falls in shelves, ledges, boulder fields, and quiet pockets where sand gathers like pale dust. The kelp forest holds to the rocky places, because giant kelp needs something firm for its holdfast to grip, and here the coast gives it that foundation in abundance. As we drift a little lower, the canopy becomes a ceiling above us, and the Big Sur kelp forest begins to feel less like something we are visiting, and more like a room the ocean has been keeping for centuries. You can see how the water moves through it, not in a straight line but in pulses. The swell comes from far out in the Pacific, softened by distance, and when it meets the kelp, it does not break the forest. It passes through. The long blades stream one way, pause, and then stream back, and if you let your thoughts follow them, they begin to loosen too. Your mind does not need to hold its shape so tightly here. There are small fish in the upper light, and they appear first as brief marks, as glints where the sun catches scales. Blue rockfish gather in loose groups, turning together without urgency, their bodies almost the color of the dim water around them. Senorita fish move nearer the kelp, narrow and delicate, slipping among the blades as if through curtains. You may notice that nothing announces itself loudly in this forest. Life is everywhere, but it is not theatrical. It flickers, pauses, feeds, hides, and returns, following the rhythm of shade and current. Even motion feels quiet, because the water rounds every edge. The kelp itself is the great maker of this calm complexity. Giant kelp can grow quickly when the conditions are right, drawing on cold, nutrient-rich water that rises from deeper places along this coast. Upwelling is the slow hidden gift beneath many kelp forests, and around Big Sur it brings nitrate and phosphate toward the light, feeding the algae that feed the whole layered community. You do not need to picture it as a dramatic rising. It is more like a breath drawn upward by the ocean's weather, a cool internal stirring that lets the forest thicken and renew itself. The cold you feel is part of that story. We let ourselves descend along one long kelp stipe, following it downward through shafts of greenish light. The surface becomes less distinct above us, no longer a skin but a brightness, a restless pale place beyond the roof of leaves. Here, midway between canopy and rock, the water feels steadier. The temperature is cool against your face and wrists, and the pressure is only a gentle enclosing hand, enough to make the world feel close and held. You hear small sounds now, or almost hear them. A faint clicking, a distant scrape, the soft hush of water moving around kelp blades and stone. The middle forest is where the shape of the habitat becomes clearer. The kelp does not stand alone like trees on land, because the sea gives it no dry trunk, no rigid crown. It is flexible, because flexibility is how it remains. Each plant is anchored below by a holdfast, a branching knot that grips rock tightly while the rest of the body rises and yields. Around that holdfast, many small animals find shelter, and if we move slowly, you can imagine the hidden spaces inside it, a miniature labyrinth of shadowed chambers, pale shells, tiny crustaceans, and soft-bodied creatures that use the kelp's base as a whole neighborhood. You start to notice how many kinds of shelter exist here. There is shade beneath a blade, shadow under a ledge, the rough cover of coralline algae, the crevice between two stones, and the living architecture of the kelp itself. A kelp forest is not only a forest because it is tall, it is a forest because it creates layers. It gives the water a ceiling, a middle, and a floor. It turns open sea into rooms and corridors. It lets the small ones have places to pause. As we move through it, your own thoughts may begin to find places to pause as well. A sheephead may pass below us, heavy-lipped and unhurried, its body moving with a patient strength that suits the dimness. Nearer the rocks, painted greenlings and small perch keep close to cover, their colors muted by the water until they seem almost part of the stone. You might see a flash of orange from a Garibaldi, bright even in this softened light, though here, near Big Sur, the colder water changes the cast of everything. The animals do not need us to admire them. They have their roots, their feeding places, their habits shaped by current and season. We simply drift beside them for a little while. The science of this place is gentle when you let it unfold slowly. Sunlight feeds the kelp, and the kelp feeds grazers and shelters fish, while broken pieces drift away to nourish creatures beyond the forest's edge. Some blades are torn loose by winter storms and carried into deeper water, where they become food for animals that may never see the living canopy. Even detachment is not waste here. A blade that leaves the forest continues its journey, softening, sinking, carrying stored sunlight into dimmer places. You can think of the Big Sur kelp forest as a slow exchange between brightness and depth. And as we sink further, the bright canopy loosens above us, and the next layer begins where the green light turns heavier and the rocks gather closer beneath our feet. Down here, the Big Sur kelp forest becomes quieter, darker, and more textured, as though the ocean has lowered its voice so we can hear the stone. The blades above still sway, but they are farther away now, like branches seen from a shaded path. The water has a deeper chill. It rests along your skin with a smooth, steady coolness, and every movement you make seems to slow before it is finished. The scent of salt and kelp becomes imagined rather than direct, a memory of shore carried inward, while the sounds around us settle into small clicks, faint knocks and the low pulse of swell against rock. The bottom is not a flat ending. It is a landscape of boulders, shelves, crevices, and sand channels, all shaped by the same restless geology that makes Big Sur so steep above the sea. Granite, metamorphic rock, fractured blocks, and worn stones offer hard places for algae and animals to hold. In the dim light, red and pink crusts of coralline algae coat the rock like old paint, and brown understory algae make smaller thickets beneath the giant kelp. You can see why this forest feels ancient, even though individual kelp plants may live far shorter lives than trees on land. The pattern is what persists. If you look closely, the holdfasts seem almost root-like, though they do not drink from the stone as roots do. They grip rather than feed, fastening the kelp in place while the blades above gather light and nutrients from the surrounding water. Around each holdfast, brittle stars may tuck their arms into shadow, crabs may pick their way across rough surfaces, and small snails may graze quietly where films of algae grow. Nothing needs to hurry in your attention. You can choose one patch of rock and let it become the whole world for a while. The longer you look, the more it opens. Sea stars may rest here with the calm confidence of things perfectly suited to slow work. Ochre stars, bat stars, and other rocky reef species move so gradually that their motion feels more like a decision held over time than an action. Their tube feet touch and release, tasting the world through contact. Nearby, anemones open like soft flowers in the water, their tentacles receiving whatever the current brings. The comparison to flowers is imperfect, of course, because these are animals, patient and responsive, but your half-sleeping mind may keep the image anyway. It is a peaceful one. The Big Sur Kelp forest is shaped by cold water, but also by disturbance. Winter storms can thin the canopy, strong waves can tear kelp from rock. Warm years can reduce the nutrients that giant kelp needs, and grazing by sea urchins can change entire stretches of reef when balance is lost. Yet we don't need to make that story sharp. The ocean is always changing its arrangements. Forests expand, retreat, recover, and shift. What matters here, in this quiet descent, is the way life keeps making use of texture, current, and light, finding small continuities inside larger change. You may notice purple urchins in the crevices, their spines moving subtly as water passes over them. They graze on algae, and in balanced places they are part of the reef's ordinary life, small dark stars of appetite tucked among the stones. Red urchins may sit lower and larger, their spines deeper in color, their presence slow and almost meditative. If you imagine reaching out, you don't touch them. We only look. We let the scene remain itself, because there is a special comfort in being near a living place without needing to alter it, name everything, or take anything away. A sea otter may be somewhere above, wrapped in the kelp canopy, resting in the heave of the surface. We might not see it from here, but its presence belongs to the Big Sur Kelp forest, because otters can help keep urchin grazing in balance by feeding on sea urchins and other invertebrates. This is one of those quiet relationships that holds a landscape together, not as a simple chain, but as a web of pressures, appetites, shelters, and returns. The forest is not peaceful because nothing feeds. It is peaceful because feeding, growing, hiding, and resting all belong to the same slow pattern. The light continues to dim as we hover near the rocks. Reds fade first underwater, and oranges soften, leaving blues, greens, and browns to carry most of what remains. Your eyes adjust without effort. The kelp becomes silhouette and movement. The sand between rocks looks pale and cool, marked by ripples that remember passing water. Fine particles drift through the beam of light like dust in a quiet room, except each speck is held in suspension, falling so slowly it seems undecided. You can let your thoughts become like that, neither rising nor falling quickly, simply present in the water. Below this, the forest opens into the lower reef, where the canopy is now a distant roof and the seafloor gathers the day's filtered shadow. Here, in the lower reaches of the Big Sur Kelp forest, the ocean feels older, not because time moves differently, but because the signs of time are everywhere. The rocks are worn into hollows, shell fragments collect in pockets, sand shifts grain by grain through small channels. The kelp holdfasts cling to stone that has endured waves for far longer than any single living blade. When we pause here, your body may feel heavier in the most soothing way, as if the depth has placed a blanket over the edges of thought. The water is cold, but not unkind. It is simply constant. The scene is less golden now. Above us, the kelp canopy breaks the sunlight into dim, wavering pieces, and those pieces arrive late, softened by distance. Some beams catch suspended plankton, making the water sparkle faintly before the brightness dissolves. Other beams slide over the backs of fish and vanish into crevices. The smell of the shore is gone from this imagined breath, replaced by the sense of mineral coolness, by salt held in darkness, by the clean absence of dry things. You may hear your own breathing in the mind more clearly now, steady and low, matching the slow surge around the stones. Rockfish appear here like thoughts that have learned to stay quiet. Some hold in place beside boulders, adjusting their fins with delicate precision, while others drift into shadow and return again. Their eyes seem large in the dimness, suited to a world where light is precious and scattered. Kelp greenlings rest close to the bottom. Crabs move with small, deliberate steps. Nudibranchs, if you notice them, bring surprising color to the subdued reef. Tiny living ornaments moving slowly over sponge, hydroid, or algae. You don't need to chase them with your attention. They come into awareness when the mind is ready. This lower forest depends on what happens above, but it is not merely underneath. Pieces of kelp drift down and lodge among rocks, feeding grazers and decomposers. Tiny bits of organic matter settle from the water column, becoming food for animals that filter, scrape, sift, or wait. The current brings oxygen and carries away waste. Even the quietest crevice is connected to the moving Pacific. When you picture the Big Sur kelp forest now, you can picture not one place but many linked places. A canopy, a midwater, a reef, a sandy edge, and beyond them the deeper blue. Sponges may coat shaded surfaces in muted colors, drawing water through their bodies in a slow, continuous filtering. Tunicates may cluster like small translucent pouches, taking in the sea and keeping what nourishes them. These animals can feel almost motionless to us, but they are busy in the deepest, calmest sense, living by exchange rather than pursuit. They remind you that not all life announces itself through travel. Some life stays, opens, receives, and transforms what passes through it. There is a lesson there, though we don't need to hold it too tightly. It can simply drift beside us. The geology beneath the kelp gives the whole ecosystem its arrangement. Hard rock allows kelp to anchor, and uneven rock multiplies shelter. A smooth plain would not offer the same rooms, edges, and shaded pockets. Big Sur's underwater terrain, shaped by tectonic uplift, wave energy, landslides, and long erosion, gives the kelp forest its varied floor. The coast above may look dramatic from land, but down here its continuation feels hushed and intimate. Every ledge softens the current. Every crack becomes a refuge. Every boulder changes the way water moves, and in those small changes, life finds a place. We drift along a sand channel now, pale beneath the darker reef, and the contrast is gentle. Sand records motion with ripples, and the ripples show how water has passed, back and forth, with no need for haste. A flatfish might lie nearly invisible, holding the pattern of the bottom in its skin. Small worms and burrowing creatures live beneath the surface, turning and aerating the sediment in ways we mostly never see. The forest does not end at the edge of kelp. It loosens into neighboring habitats, and the border between them is soft, like sleep arriving gradually. And as we follow that pale sand lower, the kelp thins behind us, and the Big Sur coast becomes a dim memory held above the deeper water. The edge of the Big Sur kelp forest is not a line you cross all at once. It is a fading. Fewer tall stipes rise from the rocks. The canopy opens. The light from above spreads more evenly, less patterned by blades, and the water seems wider around us. Behind us, the forest still sways, dense and sheltering, while ahead, the reef slopes toward quieter blue. You may feel the change in your body as space opens, the way a room feels different when you step from a doorway into a hall. The same cold water holds us, but it holds us with more distance now. Here, currents become easier to imagine. They move along the coast, around points and headlands, over shelves and through submarine valleys, carrying plankton, larvae, spores, and the faint chemical messages of living things. The Big Sur shoreline above is shaped by the meeting of land and sea, and this submerged edge is shaped by movement just as surely. Kelp forests need enough motion to bring nutrients and clear away waste, but not so much that every holdfast is torn loose. Balance is not stillness. Balance is a kind of ongoing adjustment, like your breath settling deeper without ever fully stopping. You see drifting kelp fragments here, pieces of blade and stipe turning slowly as they leave the forest. Some may sink, some may travel, some may be eaten by small grazers, bacteria, amphipods, or animals farther from the rocks. In this way, the forest feeds places beyond its own shadow. Sunlight gathered near the surface becomes matter, and matter becomes a meal, and the meal becomes movement in another body. The thought is simple and restful. Nothing bright is lost immediately. It changes form, dims, descends, and continues. You can let that be enough. A school of fish may pass between us and the fading kelp, its shape forming and unforming without command. Each fish keeps distance from its neighbors by senses fine enough to seem almost like shared thought, though it is made from vision, pressure, movement, and response. They turn, and a soft flash runs through the group. Then they turn again, and the flash is gone. In the half-light, this is one of the gentlest sights the forest gives you. A brief silver breathing, a collective calm that appears without fanfare and dissolves back into blue. The water feels slightly darker here, though not empty. The sound of the surf is gone now, replaced by the deep, muted presence of the ocean itself. If a harbor seal moved through the outer forest, it would pass like a smooth shadow, curious and quiet, using the water with a grace that needs no performance. Cormorants may dive from above in the brighter hours, entering the upper forest like dark arrows softened by water. But we are below that livelier zone now. We are where the day's activity arrives only as traces, as distant motion, as drifting particles. At the boundary of kelp and open water, the science becomes a story of edges. Ecologists often find that edges are rich places because they allow different habitats to meet. Reef fish can shelter in kelp and feed near sand. Invertebrates can use hard surfaces and soft pockets. Larvae carried by currents may settle where chemistry, texture, and timing happen to align. The Big Sur kelp forest is not isolated from the Pacific around it. It breathes with it, it gives and receives. It is held by cold water, stone, light, and the constant slow arrival of the sea. You may find comfort in that, as you drift with me along the dim outer reef. A landscape does not need walls to have identity. It can be itself through relationships, through repeated patterns, through the way light falls and currents return. The kelp forest is made of living strands, but also of the spaces between them. It is made of what passes through. Your own mind, loosening towards sleep, may feel similar now, less like a fixed place and more like a quiet field where sensations arrive, touch gently, and pass on. And as the kelp canopy recedes into a darker green behind us, we sink toward the softer margins where rock gives way to deeper sand. The Big Sur kelp forest now hangs above and behind us, a wavering memory of amber blades and filtered light, while below us the sand grows broader and calmer. This is still part of the same coastal world, the same Pacific slope, the same patient meeting of stone, water, and life. The seafloor here is softer under the imagination. Fine sediment lies in shallow ripples, and small shells rest half-buried like pale fragments of moonlight. The water has a deeper blue-gray cast. It touches your skin with the same cool steadiness, and the pressure gathers around us as a quiet reassurance. In sandy places, life often hides by becoming subtle. You learn to look for small disturbances rather than obvious forms. A slight mound, a breathing hole, a track that crosses one ripple and disappears beneath the next. Sand dollars may live partly buried where conditions suit them, filtering tiny food from the water or sediment. Worms make tubes, clams draw water down through siphons, tiny crustaceans move between grains. The surface can appear empty only when we pass too quickly, and we are not passing quickly now. We are letting the bottom teach us its slower language. The kelp still matters here, even where it no longer grows thickly. Detritus from the forest can settle across sand, and animals adapted to softer ground can feed on the organic richness it brings. The connection is quiet, but real. Giant kelp gathers the energy of sunlight, and some of that energy travels outward and downward, beyond the rocks that held it upright. In the Big Sur kelp forest and its margins, the boundary between forest and seafloor is more like a longed exhale than a closed door. What begins above can come to rest below. Light dims evenly now. Without the canopy overhead, there are fewer stripes and flickers, and the world becomes a broad, low glow. Blue fades toward grey. Grey gathers into shadow. The sand reflects what little light remains, so the bottom seems to hold a quiet brightness of its own, not shining, only visible. You may feel your thoughts lowering with it, spreading out like fine sediment after a wave has passed. Everything disturbed settles eventually. Everything lifted by the water finds its way down when the motion softens. A small ray might rest on the sand, its body shaped to the floor, its eyes raised just enough to watch the water. It does not make the scene tense. It belongs to the quiet. Its movement, when it comes, is a slow lifting, a ripple passing through wings of flesh, a glide that leaves the sand barely changed. Flatfish share this art of almost vanishing, carrying mottled patterns that let them lie between visibility and sleep. You can admire them without needing them to perform. The ocean has many ways of being alive without being loud. The chemistry of this lower water is part of the calm we feel. Cold water can hold more oxygen than warm water, and along this coast, mixing and upwelling help renew what living creatures need. Yet the deeper we drift, the less direct the sunlight becomes, and the more the ecosystem depends on what arrives from elsewhere. Food falls, drifts, dissolves, or is carried by animals moving between layers. This is one reason the sea feels so connected in depth. No layer is entirely alone. Even the dimmest bottom receives messages from above. We pause beside a low rock outcrop, where the last kelp stipes thin into scattered forms. Their holdfasts grip the stone, and small red algae cling near them, making a muted garden close to the bottom. Anemones wait in the current. A crab tucks itself into a shadowed seam. A few fish hover near the shelter, neither hiding nor fully exposed. You may notice how comforting it is to see life arranged around shelter, not in panic, but in ordinary preference. Every creature has its closeness, its distance, its chosen dimness. There is a kind of rest in being unseen. Down here, color softens, outlines blur, and the water gives privacy to everything. The Big Sur coast above may receive sun, wind, and human eyes, but the lower margin of the kelp forest keeps its own quiet. We are guests in that quiet, and we do not need to leave a mark. We only drift, listening to the hush grow wider, feeling the cool water steady us, watching the last amber ribbons sway far above like thoughts we no longer need to finish. And as we descend beyond the scattered holdfasts, the forest becomes an overhead shadow, and the deeper Pacific opens beneath its fading edge. The first feeling beyond that edge is space, a wider blue around your body, where the kelp no longer gathers close enough to touch. Behind us, the Big Sur kelp forest still lifts its long blades into the filtered light, but ahead of us the water opens like a slow breath held beneath the coast. You can feel the difference in the movement. The surge is still present, but it has softened into a deeper rocking, a broad and patient motion that seems to come from far beyond our small descent. We are not leaving the forest entirely, because the sea does not draw its borders sharply. Fronds torn loose from the canopy can drift after us, and the lives that began among the kelp may pass through this dimmer water. A young fish that sheltered in the blades may venture toward the open edge. A crab may cross the sand between rocks. A piece of kelp may sink beside us, turning slowly, carrying amber sunlight downward in a form the deeper world can receive. The water darkens by degrees, and you may notice how gentle that change feels when nothing rushes it. The surface is now only a pale ceiling, broken and distant, while the forest's upper leaves move like memories in the green-blue dimness behind us. The cold is steadier here. It touches your cheeks, your hands, the soft place at your throat, and it seems to quiet each thought before it can grow too bright. We keep descending, not because there is somewhere urgent to arrive, but because downward has become the calmest direction. At this depth, the seafloor slopes in a way you sense more than see. Sand gathers in broad patches, interrupted by rock outcrops and low ledges where smaller algae and invertebrates still hold on. The Big Sur coast above with its cliffs and ravines, continues below in these submerged shapes. Though everything down here is softened by water and shadow, you can imagine old fractures in the stone, places where pressure, uplift, and waves have made room for life. The land's roughness becomes the sea's shelter. We drift over a patch of sand where ripples lie close together, each one laid down by water moving back and forth with quiet persistence. A few shell pieces rest in the troughs, pale and smooth, worn beyond the shape of the animals that made them. Fine grains lift when the current touches them, then settle again as if sleep has returned. If you let your attention rest on that settling, you may feel your own body answering it. The stirred places in you begin to lower grain by grain. A small fish hovers near a rock and keeps us in its wide, dark eye, neither fleeing nor coming closer. It tilts slightly in the water, balancing with delicate fin movements that are almost too small to notice. Nearby, a crab lifts one leg and then another across the stone, moving with the careful patience of a creature that knows every surface by touch. Nothing in this lower margin asks to be hurried. We can watch one step, one flick of a fin, one ripple of sand, and let that be enough. The Big Sur kelp forest above us depends on sunlight, but its influence reaches into this softer depth through what falls away. Bits of kelp become food for grazers and scavengers. Tiny fragments dissolve into the water. Microbes begin their quiet work, turning one form of life into another. This is not a loss in the language of the ocean, it is continuation. The forest grows upward, the blades break, the pieces drift down, and the deeper animals receive what the bright canopy has gathered. You may picture the kelp's journey from holdfast to blade, from blade to drifting fragment, from fragment to the mouthparts of a small amphipod, or the slow digestion of bacteria. It sounds like science, and it is, but it is also a lullaby of exchange. Nothing remains in one form forever. Even the kelp forest, so tall and waving, is made of passages. We are moving through one of those passages now, where the sunlit work of the upper water becomes the dim nourishment of the lower sea. The light here has a bluish hush, and the colors of the animals are quieter than they would be at the surface. Red becomes brown. Orange becomes muted rust. Yellow fades into something almost gray. Yet the loss of brightness does not make the scene less beautiful. It makes beauty less insistent. You begin to see texture more than color, the roughness of encrusting sponge, the velvet look of algae, the fine pattern on a fish's flank, the powdery softness of settled sediment. We move slowly beside another low boulder, and its surface is crowded in a way that rewards patience. Tiny tube worms extend delicate crowns into the water, filtering what the current brings. Bryozoans form pale branching patches that look almost plant-like, though they are colonies of small animals. A squat lobster may tuck itself backward under an overhang, holding still in a shadowed place where its long claws rest like folded instruments. You don't need to name each creature as it appears. Naming can come softly, after wonder has had time to settle. This is one of the quiet gifts of the Big Sur kelp forest and its deeper edge. It teaches you to notice without taking possession. You can observe the pattern of life without gripping it too tightly in thought. A holdfast is shelter. A blade is food. A shadow is rest. A current is a road. Each simple thing becomes part of something layered and moving, and you are allowed to float among those layers without solving them. Sleep often begins this way, when attention becomes gentle instead of sharp. The water presses a little more firmly now, but the pressure is even and smooth, like a hand resting over a blanket. Your ears might imagine that slow adjustment, that enclosed feeling of depth, though nothing about it needs alarm. We are still close to the living coast, still within the long breath of Big Sur, but the air world has become remote. The wind is gone. The cliff faces are only remembered shapes above the waterline. Down here, the body understands quiet before the mind finds words for it. And as we sink farther along the slope, the last tall strands of kelp withdraw into the dimness behind us, while the deeper reef gathers its own low light. The deeper reef below the Big Sur kelp forest feels like a place that has been listening for a very long time. The rocks are darker here, and the spaces between them seem wider, filled with cool blue water and slow-moving shadow. you can still sense the forest above, because pieces of it pass occasionally through the water, and because the animals here are part of the same coastal web. Yet the mood has changed. The canopy is no longer around us. It is above us, behind us, a suspended roof in the distance. We drift closer to the bottom, where the swell moves more gently around stone. The sand is finer in some pockets, coarser in others, and the difference matters to the creatures who live there. A burrow needs grains that hold. A filter feeder needs water that moves. A small fish needs a crack deep enough to enter, and a ledge broad enough to cast shade. You may feel how practical and tender the landscape is at once, because every roughness becomes a possibility, and every hollow becomes a kind of room. Cold water slips along the reef with the unbroken patience of night. It brings dissolved oxygen, faint scents, microscopic food, and the subtle signals by which animals find one another. In the darkening sea, scent and touch begin to matter more than bright display. A crab follows chemical traces along the rock. A snail grazes over a film that we would barely see. A fish feels pressure changes along its lateral line, sensing movement before movement becomes visible. The ocean is full of senses that are not ours, and we drift through them quietly. The Big Sur kelp forest is often imagined from above as a floating canopy of golden brown blades under the California sun. But from below, it becomes something more sheltering and mysterious, a high living ceiling through which the day arrives in fragments. Here, lower on the reef, you understand the canopy by its absence as much as its presence. Where it shades the water, certain animals gather. Where it opens, others feed. Where it breaks and falls, the forest becomes nourishment. The whole place is a slow conversation between height and depth. You may see a sea cucumber lying along the bottom, soft-bodied and patient, taking in sediment and sorting what can be used from what must pass on. Its life is close to the floor, close to the quiet work of turning and cleaning, and there is something deeply restful in that. Not all creatures need to roam. Some live by attending to what settles. They remind us that the bottom is not an ending, but a place where the ocean continues its smallest tasks, without display and without hurry. A faint current moves through a gap between two rocks, and we follow it for a while. It narrows, then widens, then slips over a patch of pink coralline algae and a few small anemones. The anemones bend and open in the flow, their tentacles soft as underwater grasses, though each one is an animal waiting with exquisite stillness. You may feel that waiting is peaceful rather than tense. Waiting here is simply a way of belonging to the current. The water brings what it brings, and the open body receives it. The rocks themselves tell a slower story than any living thing can tell. Big Sur's geology is complicated, shaped by ancient marine sediments, granitic bodies, metamorphic rocks, uplift, faulting, erosion, and the long pressure of tectonic motion along the edge of the continent. Yet down here, those large words soften into surfaces. A ledge, a crack, a slope, a boulder resting in sand. The science remains real, but the experience becomes tactile, almost intimate. You do not need to hold the whole history. You can rest your attention on one stone. Around that stone, the reef makes a neighborhood. A limpet holds tightly to the surface, its shell shaped by exposure and grazing. A chiton presses close, armored plates fitting along its back as it moves with almost invisible slowness. Small shrimp flicker in and out of cover, transparent enough to vanish when they pause. If a larger fish passes overhead, the smaller ones do not erupt in panic. They adjust, they tuck closer, they wait. Then the ordinary rhythm resumes, as water continues its calm passage over the reef. This is how the Big Sur kelp forest and its neighboring depths hold their peace. Peace is not the absence of appetite, movement, or change. It is the steadiness of a place where every motion belongs to a larger rhythm. Kelp grows and breaks, urchins graze, otters feed, fish hover, worms filter, sand shifts. The forest thickens in one season and thins in another. Everything alters, but not everything is urgent. You can let that idea settle through you like cool water through open hands. The dimness deepens, and the ocean begins to feel less like a view and more like an atmosphere. You are inside the color now, inside the cold, inside the muffled distance from the surface. Far above, sunlight still touches the canopy, but here it arrives as a faint blue remembrance. Particles drift slowly past your face, each one catching light for a moment before disappearing. It is easy to imagine thoughts doing the same, appearing, glowing softly, and then moving on without needing to be followed. We descend another few quiet body lengths, and the reef becomes lower, with more sand between the stones. The kelp forest is no longer a tall presence around us, but its pieces remain, caught in hollows and stretched across rocks like loose brown ribbons. Small animals gather around these fragments. Amphipods, isopods, and tiny grazers begin the work of breaking them down. The texture changes from smooth blade to softened edge, from living tissue to drifting food, from canopy to sediment. In the ocean, even falling is a way of feeding. You may feel yourself falling in the same harmless way, not downward through danger, but downward through release. The bed beneath you, wherever you are listening, can become this slope of sand and stone. Your blankets can become the cool pressure of the water. The room around you can become the wide blue dimness beyond the kelp. We keep moving together, and nothing needs to be held tightly. The Big Sur coast is above us, the forest is behind us, and the deeper water opens with patient room. And as the reef lowers again, the sea takes on a darker shade, and we drift toward the quiet fields where fallen kelp gathers in the hollows. The fallen kelp lies in loose folds along the bottom, and in this dimmer part of the Big Sur kelp forest's reach, it looks like soft brown cloth left by the tide of the upper world. Some pieces are fresh enough to keep their smooth sheen, others have frayed into lace, their edges softened by grazers and microbes. They move slightly when the current passes, lifting at one end, settling again, and giving the sand beneath them a shaded, secret quality. You can almost hear that movement, though it is more felt than heard, a slow brushing in the hush. We pause near one of these gathered blades, because a whole small community may be attending to it. Tiny crustaceans pick at the surface. Snails graze the film that grows there. Bacteria, invisible to us, begin to loosen the kelp's stored energy into forms other lives can use. This work is quiet, but it is not minor. The great canopy above becomes part of the lower food web through countless small mouths and unseen transformations. What once stood upright in the light now rests in shadow, still giving. There is comfort in that downward generosity. The Big Sur kelp forest does not keep all it makes for itself. Some of its growth shelters fish among the blades. Some feeds grazers on the reef. Some breaks loose and travels. Some sinks into places like this, where the light is low and the animals are patient. You can think of it as a slow sharing between layers, a way the upper forest remembers the lower world. The ocean often works by such quiet deliveries, each one small, each one part of something vast. A brittle star may emerge from beneath the kelp fragment, its arms slender and flexible, moving with a delicate searching motion. It does not seem to hurry, though every movement has purpose. Nearby, a small sea star presses against the surface of a rock, its body almost flush with the stone. The animals here are close to texture, close to surfaces, close to the detailed meeting of body and world. Watching them, you may feel your own awareness settle closer to the simple facts of contact. Warmth under blankets, breath in the chest, darkness behind your eyelids. The water carries a faint turbidity near the bottom, a softness made of suspended grains and organic particles. It blurs distant edges and makes the reef feel private. When the current strengthens slightly, the particles lift and shimmer. When it eases, they descend again. There is no sharp beginning to either motion. Everything is gradual. Your thoughts may rise and settle in the same way, touched by a small current, then released back into calm. We do not need to chase clarity here. The blur is part of the rest. In places where fallen kelp accumulates, the chemistry of the sediment can change. Decomposition uses oxygen and releases nutrients, and small animals respond to those local conditions in subtle ways. Some gather where food is abundant, others avoid places where the sediment grows too depleted. The details are complex, but the feeling is simple. Even on the seafloor, the forest keeps creating patterns. A fallen blade becomes shade, food, shelter, and chemistry. It becomes a temporary landscape within the larger landscape, a brown-gold island in the blue-gray quiet. You may notice how the mind softens when it follows processes instead of events. Nothing dramatic has to happen. A blade grows, a blade breaks, a blade drifts, a blade settles. Around it, small lives arrive and depart. Over time, the kelp becomes part of the sediment, part of the animals, part of the dissolved richness of the water. In the Big Sur kelp forest, even a fragment can carry the whole story of sunlight, cold water, rock and return. We let that story move slowly through us. A rockfish hangs a little above the bottom, almost motionless except for the careful opening and closing of its mouth and gills. Water passes through it. Oxygen enters. The fish remains suspended, balanced between effort and rest. Its stillness is active, though it looks effortless, and that may be one reason it feels so calming to watch. Many things that sustain life are quiet from the outside. Breathing can look like stillness. Listening can look like sleep. Holding steady can be its own deep movement. The slope carries us onward, and the kelp fragments become more scattered. We pass a place where sand has collected against the base of a rock, making a smooth drift like snow in another world. The comparison is gentle but imperfect, because this sand is made of shells, minerals, broken skeletons and worn stone, all carried and sorted by the sea. It is the ocean's pale dust, shaped by motion and rest. When the current touches it, a few grains roll down the slope and stop again. Smallness has its own pace. We remain near the bottom, where sound is mostly pressure and vibration. A distant wave may send a low pulse through the water. A fish may flick its tail and make a tiny displacement that another creature feels. A crab's legs may tap faintly against stone. These are not loud sounds, but they are enough for the animals who live here. You, drifting with me, do not need to hear everything clearly. It is enough to sense that the quiet is inhabited, that silence in the sea is made of many soft activities. Above and behind us, the Big Sur kelp forest continues to sway, though we now know it through memory, fragments, and the slow rain of what it releases. This is how many landscapes extend themselves beyond what the eye can hold. A forest on land sends leaves into soil, seeds into wind, shade into streams. A kelp forest sends blades into currents, shelter into water, and food into darkness. The forms differ, but the generosity feels familiar. The living world is always moving beyond its visible edges, and as the fallen kelp thins along the sand, we drift into a broader dimness, where the reef becomes sparse and the water feels deeper around us. The broader dimness below the Big Sur kelp forest is a place of fewer shapes and longer distances. The rocks sit farther apart now, low and rounded, and between them the sand spreads in cool, uninterrupted fields. The light has become thin enough that the seafloor seems to appear slowly, as if each detail must rise through blue-gray water before you can receive it. You may feel your own attention slowing to match that arrival. First a ripple, then a shell, then the faint outline of a burrow. Nothing insists. We move over the sand without touching it, close enough to feel its softness in the imagination. The grains are not all alike. Some are dark mineral fragments from the rugged coast. Some are pale bits of shell and calcareous algae. Some have traveled only a short distance from a nearby reef, while others have been sorted again and again by waves, currents, and gravity. Together they make a surface that looks simple from above, but contains many histories. The ocean is good at hiding complexity inside calm appearances. In this quieter field, animals are often known by signs. A small mound may mark where a worm has been feeding. A paired opening may show where a clam draws water down and sends it back out. A delicate trail may have been made by a snail moving through the night. You learn to read absence gently here. Not every life needs to show its body. Some lives are present as patterns, disturbances, openings, and faint marks left behind. That hiddenness gives the bottom a peaceful privacy. The Big Sur kelp forest still enters this scene as a distant source. A fragment of kelp lies half buried in the sand, its edges dark and ragged, and around it the bottom is slightly more active. Small scavengers gather where food has arrived. Microbes work invisibly. The fragment will not remain recognizable forever. It will soften, break, dissolve, and be taken in. Yet for a while, it makes a small center of abundance in the broad quiet. You can rest your attention there, on one piece of the upper forest becoming part of the lower floor. The water feels colder now in the mind, though the change is subtle. It has the kind of cold that makes everything slower, a clear, steady coolness without edge. Your hands seem to float farther from you. Your breathing, if you notice it, may feel deeper and more spacious. The pressure around us is still gentle, but it is more complete, touching from every side with the same even patience. This is one of the comforts of imagined depth. It surrounds without asking, holds without gripping, and leaves nothing exposed. A small flatfish lifts from the sand just ahead of us, glides a short distance, and settles again into near invisibility. Its body makes a brief cloud of grains, and then the cloud lowers, softening back into the bottom. We watch the sand close over the moment. There is something soothing in how little remains. The sea does not hold every movement as a mark. It allows disturbance, and then it allows restoration. You may feel that as permission in your own body, a permission to let the day's small disturbances settle out of sight. Farther along, a low rock carries a few pale sponges and a fringe of small algae, not enough to make a forest, but enough to soften the stone. A fish rests beside it, using the slight elevation as shelter in an otherwise open place. The relationship is modest. A rock interrupts the current. The interruption creates a calmer pocket. The calmer pocket becomes useful. Life often begins with such small changes, and the ocean notices them with great attention. Where we might see only a stone, an animal finds a home. The science of these sandy margins is full of movement, hidden beneath stillness. Sediment shifts downslope during storms. Organic matter settles from above. Burrowing animals mix the upper layers, bringing oxygen down and nutrients up. Currents sort grains by size and weight, leaving different textures in different places. All of this happens slowly enough that the scene can look unchanged while change continues. You can let that thought be restful. A life can be moving, healing, and rearranging even when it appears still from the outside. We drift onward, and the last visible signs of tall kelp fade into scattered traces. The Big Sur kelp forest is no longer a structure around us, but a relationship above us, a source of shade, food, and memory. You may picture the canopy far overhead, rocking in the swell, bright at its upper edges, dark at its roots. That image can remain with us as we move lower. It is like knowing there is a forest above a valley at night, unseen but present, breathing in its own way. The open sand gives the descent a softer rhythm. Without many vertical forms, your gaze moves farther before it rests. The body begins to feel less like it is traveling through a place and more like it is being carried within a wide element. Blue-gray water ahead, pale sand below, darker water behind, and the faintest ceiling of light above. These simple directions are enough. We do not need a destination to remain oriented. Downward, outward, quieter. The sea holds each word until even the words begin to loosen, and as the sandy field slopes more gently into deeper water, the last memory of the kelp canopy becomes a dim green hush above us. The dim green hush above us is still the Big Sur kelp forest, but now it belongs to distance. Like a thought remembered just before sleep, we are below the main architecture of the forest, below the waving blades and clustered fish, below the bright work of photosynthesis. Yet the landscape we enter is not separate from it. It is the receiving place. It is where particles fall, where fragments settle, where small animals make use of what the upper world releases. The ocean is layered, and every layer leans on another. Here the bottom begins to feel almost plain, though plainness has its own beauty when you give it time. Sand and fine sediment spread in low undulations. Occasional stones appear like islands. The light is faint enough that shadows no longer have sharp edges, and everything looks wrapped in the same cool veil. You may feel sleep approaching in that veil, not as an interruption, but as another kind of depth. The mind does not switch off. It dims, widens, and becomes less concerned with holding every detail. A line of small depressions crosses the sand, perhaps made by something moving earlier, perhaps altered already by current. We cannot know for certain, and we do not need to. Certainty is not required for wonder. The seafloor keeps many of its stories partly covered. A burrow opens and closes. A track softens. A shell is buried, uncovered, and buried again. Time here does not present itself as a clear sequence. It accumulates as texture, and then it is smoothed by water. We hover over a place where fine particles are settling from the water column, too slowly to make drama, but steadily enough to feed the bottom. Marine snow is the name often given to this falling mixture of organic matter, tiny remains, mucus, plankton fragments, and mineral grains. In this coastal depth, it mingles with pieces from the kelp forest and the life of the productive upper water. The phrase sounds almost delicate, and the sight is delicate too. Specks drift downward through the dimness, each one a small delivery from above. You can imagine those particles brushing past your arms as we descend. They are too small to feel, but in the mind they add texture to the water, making it seem full of quiet descent. The Big Sur kelp forest has its own version of this falling, with fragments of blade, loosened cells, and dissolved richness joining the broader rain of the sea. Some will be eaten before it reaches the bottom, some will settle into sediment, some will become part of a worm, a clam, a bacterial film, a fish. The animals here often live by patience and by the careful use of what arrives. A tube worm waits with feathery structures extended. A buried clam opens its siphons to the water. A small crustacean emerges when the light is low enough, searching across the sand for edible traces. Their world is not empty of action, but the action is spread thin and quiet, like a soft sound heard through a wall. You may find that comforting. There is life here, but it does not pull you upward. It lets you sink. The temperature remains cool and even, and the soundscape grows more internal. You hear the imagined rhythm of your own breath more than anything outside. The water has taken the sharpness from distant movement. Even the memory of waves has become a low, slow pressure passing through the body of the sea. If you were to look back now, the kelp forest would be a darkened fringe high above the slope, a place of vertical lines and swaying leaves. Ahead, there is only the lower, wider quiet. We continue downward along the soft incline, and the science follows us without becoming heavy. Pressure increases with depth, molecule by molecule, water stacked above water. Light decreases because seawater absorbs and scatters it, taking the warm colors first and leaving blue to travel farther. Food becomes less tied to immediate sunlight and more tied to transport, sinking, and current. These facts do not disturb the calm, they deepen it. They show how the world changes gradually, with rules so steady they can feel like music. A small animal stirs beneath the sand, making one side of a ripple tremble. Then the tremor stops. You may have almost missed it, and that almost is part of the experience. Down here, attention becomes spacious enough to include the barely visible. The Big Sur kelp forest above gave us tall blades and moving fish, but this deeper margin gives us subtler signs, smaller gestures, quieter forms of belonging. It asks less of the eye and more of the whole resting mind. The sediment itself is a living surface. Bacteria coat grains. Tiny animals move between them. Oxygen penetrates only so far before the chemistry changes. Burrows create little pathways for water, altering the hidden layers below. A simple patch of sand is more like a city of small processes than a blank floor, though it remains visually calm. You do not need to picture every process distinctly. Let them merge into the sense of a bottom that breathes slowly through countless unseen openings. There is a soft mercy in landscapes that do not perform for us. The deeper margin of the Big Sur kelp forest does not arrange itself for spectacle. It simply exists in low light, cold water, and long exchange. If you drift through it half awake, you are not missing its essence. Half awake may be the right way to receive it. The details blur. the feeling remains, and the feeling is of a world carrying on peacefully beyond the reach of ordinary attention. And as we move lower still, the marine snow thickens in the dim water, and the sand below becomes smoother, quieter, and more continuous. The smoother bottom beneath us feels like a page with most of its writing erased by the sea. There are still marks, but they are faint, and you must be very patient to read them. A shallow groove curves across the sediment. A small mound rises where an animal has worked below. A darker patch may hold decaying kelp from the forest above, already softened into the color of the surrounding floor. The Big Sur kelp forest is far overhead now, but its presence keeps falling through the water in tiny pieces. We drift through that falling with no need to count or measure it. Each particle lowers at its own pace, slowed by the water's thickness, moved sideways by currents we can barely see. Some specks spin, some sink straight for a moment, then pause in a small eddy. Some disappear into darkness before they reach the bottom. It is easy to let your thoughts follow them, one by one, until following becomes too gentle to continue, and the mind simply rests inside the motion. A low swell from far above still makes itself known, but only as a long, nearly imperceptible shift. The sand responds with a faint lifting of grains in the thinnest layer near the bottom. Then the grains return. This is the ocean's version of breathing at depth, subtle and broad, an inhale from the open Pacific and an exhale along the coast. You may feel your own breathing lengthen in answer. Nothing here asks for a deep breath on command. The breath finds its way there by itself. The animals are fewer to the eye, but not absent. A sea pen might rise from softer sediment where the conditions are right, its body anchored below and its feeding structures lifted gently into the current. It looks plant-like, but again the sea reminds us that appearances are only invitations, not conclusions. Small polyps along its surface may catch drifting food. If touched by current, it bends slightly, then returns. We pass without disturbing it, giving its quiet work the wide berth that all resting things deserve. In the distance, a faint shape of rock interrupts the plain, and we let ourselves approach it slowly. The stone is low, worn, and partly buried. It carries a few attached animals, perhaps sponges, small anemones, and encrusting life that can hold to hard surface where the sand cannot cover it completely. Around it, the sediment is slightly scoured by passing water, making a shallow moat. This one stone changes the neighborhood. It gathers life by offering firmness in a soft place and shade in a dim place. The Big Sur underwater landscape is full of such transitions, from canopy to reef, from reef to sand, from sand to deeper slope. None of them needs a hard edge. We move through gradual differences, and each difference changes what can live there. Kelp needs light and rock. Burrowers need sediment. Filter feeders need current. Fish need shelter, water, and food. The whole coast is a set of overlapping invitations, and the living world answers with forms shaped by each small condition. You may feel now that the descent has become less visual and more bodily. The cool water is the main sensation. The pressure is the main architecture. The faint light is more like weather than illumination. We are held in a blue darkness that has not yet become black, a darkness with depth inside it. The Big Sur kelp forest above us was full of movement you could see, but this lower water is full of movement you sense, slow exchanges passing through and around you. A fragment of kelp turns near the bottom, then catches briefly against the buried edge of a stone. Its blade folds over itself, loosens, and settles again. There is no drama in this small snagging. It is only one more pause in a long journey. Eventually, a current may lift it. Eventually, it may break apart. Eventually, it may disappear into the sediment and the bodies of small animals. For now, it rests. You can rest with it in the dim place where the forest's bright growth becomes soft material on the floor. The quiet reflection here is almost too simple to name. Everything descends eventually, but descent is not failure. Leaves fall in forests. Snow settles on mountains. Silt gathers in river bends. Kelp sinks through cold coastal water. Your own waking thoughts, after a long day, can descend too, not lost, only laid down. The deep ocean receives without judgment. It has room for fragments, for tiredness, for unspoken things, for the slow change from brightness into rest. We remain close to the bottom as the slope continues. The sand is darker now, or perhaps the light is thinner. A few tiny animals flicker away from our shadow, though our shadow is only imagined in this low glow. The water tastes of salt in memory, smells of kelp only faintly now, and feels like clean, cold cloth around the body. You do not need to keep track of how far we have come. The journey has become a continuity of lowering, and that is enough. And as the dim water deepens further, the last visible fragments of the kelp forest become part of the slow rain that settles toward the quiet seafloor. The slow rain around us is gentle and constant, and beneath it, the deeper slope near Big Sur opens into a calmer expanse. The Big Sur kelp forest is no longer visible as a forest, yet it remains present as nourishment, memory, and origin. This is how the sea keeps connections alive beyond sight. A place can influence another place without touching it directly. A canopy can feed a plain. A rocky coast can shape a sandy bottom. A distant surface can send light downward until light becomes only a faint blue trace. We drift through that trace, and the water seems to thicken with darkness. Not a frightening darkness, not an empty one, but the soft kind that gathers in a room after lamps are lowered. Your eyes would need time here. Your thoughts need time too. We give both freely. The bottom appears in slow pieces, and each piece is quiet enough to let the next one emerge. A ripple, a pebble, a small depression, a pale shell almost covered. Then the dimness folds gently over them again. The science of light fading is simple in outline and profound in feeling. Water absorbs sunlight, and the farther we descend, the more colors are taken into the sea itself. Red goes early. Orange and yellow follow. Green dims. Blue lingers longest, but even blue has its limits. By the time the upper forest is far behind us, the world has become mostly shape, motion, and tone. You may feel how restful it is when color no longer calls for attention, when the eye stops reaching and begins to soften. Along the bottom, a small burrowing animal releases a faint puff of sediment. It blooms and then settles, making a cloud so delicate it seems more like breath than disturbance. We hover and watch it disappear. This is the rhythm now. Something lifts, something lowers, and the plane returns to itself. You can place your own thoughts inside that rhythm. A worry rises, becomes diffuse, and then settles where it no longer needs to be examined. The sea does not argue with it. The sea simply gives it room to fall. Even here, where the kelp forest feels distant, the coastal upwelling that nourishes Big Sur still matters. Cold, nutrient-rich water rises along the broader California margin, supporting plankton near the surface, feeding small grazers, fish, kelp, and the larger web that surrounds them. Some of that productivity sinks, some is carried, some becomes the faint snowfall around us. The deep and the shallow are not separate stories. They are different chapters in the same slow book, read by currents instead of hands. You may imagine the coastline above at night, though we are not going there. The cliffs stand in darkness. The surf breathes against hidden rocks. The kelp canopy moves below the surface, unseen by anyone on shore, still bending and rising in the swell. Beneath it, the reef rests. Beneath the reef, the slope receives. We are in that receiving place now, where the day's brightness has been translated into dim particles and quiet work. It is a good place to let the mind become less bright. A fish passes at the edge of visibility, only a dark shape against darker water. It moves slowly, then vanishes into the blue-gray distance. You do not need to know its name for the moment to feel complete. Sometimes the unknown is softer than the known, because it does not ask anything from memory, it simply passes. The ocean is full of such passages, lives crossing the edge of our awareness and continuing beyond it, untroubled by being only partly seen. The bottom inclines more gently now, and the sand takes on a finer, more silty look. When the current touches it, The topmost layer stirs like breath over ash, though this is not ash, but the long-gathered material of shells, rock, organic remains, and the patient work of water. It is beautiful because it is humble. It has no single shape to defend. It accepts what falls, releases what lifts, and keeps smoothing itself over time. You may feel the wish to be that simple for a while. The Big Sur Kelp forest has given way to this larger quiet, but we carry its image with us. The long blades rising through green light, the small floats holding them upward, the fish turning under the canopy, the holdfasts gripping rock, the fallen fragments resting on sand. Each image has lowered with us, becoming calmer as we descend. Memory itself can behave like light underwater. It begins bright, then softens, then becomes a gentle tone that remains even after the details fade. And as the slope carries us onward, the water grows darker still, and the seafloor begins to feel less like a landscape we cross than a silence we enter. The silence we enter is not empty, and you can sense that now without needing many visible forms. It has layers of temperature, pressure, faint movement, and slow settling. It has the memory of the Big Sur Kelp forest above, and the presence of the animals hidden in the bottom below. It has the long geology of the coast, continuing under the water in slopes and shelves, shaped by forces older than sleep. We drift inside it gently, as if the silence itself has become the water. Your body feels lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the water holds you, heavier because the depth gathers around you and quiets the edges of your awareness. This is the peaceful contradiction of sinking. You are supported as you descend. You are enclosed as you loosen. You are moving, but nothing about the movement asks for effort. The sea carries us in the same way. A slow thought carries you toward dreaming, not by pushing, but by making every other direction less necessary. The bottom here is broad, though occasional stones still rise from it. Each stone seems more solitary than the rocks above, because the spaces between them are wider. Around one stone, a few animals cling to the hard surface, living from the current that passes in faint streams. A small anemone opens and closes almost imperceptibly. A sponge draws water through itself with such steadiness that the action disappears into being. These creatures are not waiting for spectacle. They are living by the slow sufficiency of what comes. The cold is fully part of the scene now. It does not bite, it settles. It wraps the imagined body evenly, making the skin feel distant and the inner breath feel warm by contrast. You may be aware of your bed, your room, the air around you, and at the same time the mind can remain here, in the Pacific dimness below Big Sur. Sleep listening often holds both worlds gently. The real body rests in one place, while attention drifts through another, and neither needs to interrupt the other. We pass another faint track in the sediment, already blurring at the edges. It might have been made by a snail, a small crab, or a worm moving beneath the surface. The maker is gone or hidden. Only the sign remains, and even that is being softened by the water. There is peace in traces that do not demand preservation. The seafloor allows a life to pass, leaves a mark for a little while, and then smooths it into the common quiet. Nothing is made to remain sharp forever. The Big Sur Kelp forest, far above, also changes in this way, though on a different scale. Storms can tear openings in the canopy. Calm seasons can let it thicken again. Warm water, grazing, nutrients, and light all shape its reach. Yet from our depth, those changes feel like the slow breathing of a living coastline. Expansion and thinning, growth and release, shadow and opening. The forest is not a fixed object, it is a recurring pattern, and patterns can be deeply restful because they return without being identical. A faint pulse of current passes over us, and the falling particles lean slightly in one direction. For a moment, the marine snow becomes slanted, each speck following the same gentle suggestion. Then the motion slackens, and the fall becomes more vertical again. The change is small, but it reveals the water. You cannot see a current directly. You see what it carries. You cannot see time directly either. You see what it softens, moves, buries, and brings back into view. We let ourselves hover in that thought without tightening around it. The deepening water is not a classroom, though it teaches. It is not a temple, though it quiets. It is simply a place where the world has fewer sharp edges, and where every process is given room to unfold. You are allowed to be quiet here. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to yourself. The ocean does not ask for a reason. It only surrounds, cool and vast, while we continue downward. The seafloor broadens, and the last rock outcrops become low shadows behind us. Ahead, the sediment looks almost unbroken. A few tiny openings mark buried lives. A small shell rests on its side, half filled with silt. The light is now faint enough that shape and imagination work together, each completing what the other cannot fully hold. This is a natural place for the mind to loosen. When details fade, the feeling remains. The feeling is slow, cold, sheltered, and wide. And as we drift beyond the last low stones, the influence of the kelp forest becomes a quiet inheritance, falling with us into the dim Pacific plain. The quiet inheritance of the Big Sur kelp forest settles around us as fine particles, softened fragments, and the memory of green light above. We are in a lower world now, but not a separate one. The canopy fed the reef touched the sand received the falling matter, the current connected each layer with the next. You can feel that connection as a long, slow line from sunlight to darkness, from movement to rest, from the surface's broken glitter to the low blue hush where we are drifting. The plain beneath us is not truly abyssal, not yet the great distant floor of the open ocean, but it carries a hint of that larger stillness. It is smoother than the reef, dimmer than the forest, and quieter than the water near shore. The Big Sur slope continues downward towards submarine canyons and deeper basins, where sediments gather over long spans of time. We do not need to rush there. We only follow the feeling of descent, letting the coastal forest become part of a wider oceanic calm. A few particles pass close enough to become briefly bright, then vanish below. In that tiny pattern, the whole upper world seems to be descending with us in softened form. Plankton, kelp, shells, scales, waste, mucus, mineral dust, and the remains of small lives all become part of the slow rain. The words may sound plain, but the process is beautiful. The sea wastes very little. It takes what has been living, what has been broken, what has been released, and folds it into another layer of life. You may feel drowsier now, as the landscape asks less from the eye. The body can rest in the rhythm of description without needing to assemble every image sharply. Cool water, fine sediment, falling specks, a distant kelp forest above, a slope below, widening into darkness. The phrases move like the scene itself, each one settling after the last. We remain together in the descent, with my voice close enough to guide and quiet enough to leave space for your own breathing. The hidden animals of the sediment continue their work. Some feed on particles that settle from above. Some filter water from the safety of burrows. Some move through the grains, mixing them, loosening them, changing the chemistry in ways that support other forms of life. It is a world of small maintenance, not unlike the quiet repairs that happen in sleep. The body restores without announcement. The mind sorts and softens. The deeper self does its patient work while the surface self lets go. A low current slides along the bottom, and we drift with it rather than against it. The direction is not important. What matters is the yielding. The water knows the shape of the slope more intimately than we do, and it follows every slight decline, every hollow, every rise of buried stone. We can let it carry us. The Big Sur kelp forest has taught us this from the beginning. With its long blades bending instead of resisting, moving with the swell and returning when the swell has passed. There is an old calm in flexible things. Kelp survives by yielding. Sand endures by shifting. Water shapes stone by returning again and again, not by striking once. Even the animals here live through forms of softness, patience, and adjustment. A burrow is adjusted after a current. A feeding crown opens when water brings food and closes when it does not. A fish holds position with tiny movements. The sea favors attentiveness over force in many quiet places, and that attentiveness feels gentle enough to sleep beside. We sink slightly lower, and the light thins another shade. The world is not black, but it has moved close to monochrome. Blue, grey and shadow hold almost everything now. If a red animal rested nearby, it might appear dark, its color hidden by the water above us. There is something soothing about a place where brightness is not demanded. Forms can be present without display. Lives can continue without being seen. The dark allows the world to stop presenting itself and simply be. The coast above remains real, though it no longer pulls at our attention. Highway, cliff, wind, cypress, chaparral, and high ridges are all far away in another element. Down here, Big Sur is expressed as underwater slope, cold current, sediment, reef, and the distant kelp forests falling gifts. A landscape can have many faces, and this is one of its quietest. You are seeing the coast from beneath its own reflection, from a place where the land's drama has been translated into patient forms. And as the darkness grows more even, the slope becomes softer beneath us, and the descent turns from wandering into resting. The resting begins without a clear moment. One breath, we are still drifting. The next, it feels as though the water itself has slowed around us, and the seafloor has risen gently to meet our attention. The sediment below is smooth and faintly rippled, touched by currents too soft to disturb it much. A few pale flecks rest on the surface. A darker thread of old kelp lies partly buried, almost indistinguishable from the surrounding floor. The Big Sur kelp forest is now a quiet source far above, not a visible place. We hover just above the sediment, close enough that a movement of the hand would lift a cloud, though we do not move the hand. We let the bottom remain settled. The particles falling around us continue their slow descent, and some land without sound, joining the uppermost layer of the seafloor. Each landing is too small to hear, yet together these landings build the soft history of the bottom. Grain by grain, fragment by fragment, the ocean keeps a record that is always being rewritten. You may feel how different this is from the bright surface where we began. There the water trembled with reflected sky, and the kelp canopy turned sunlight into gold. Here the light is almost gone, and the gold has become memory, food, and faint sediment. Yet the descent has not been a loss. It has been a softening. Every layer gave up some brightness and offered another kind of beauty. The canopy gave movement. The reef gave texture. The sand gave quiet. The lower slope gives rest. A buried animal draws water down through the sediment, and the sign of it is only the smallest opening, almost lost in the dimness. Nearby, a shell fragment catches a last trace of blue light. The current moves so slowly that marine snow seems to hang rather than fall. You can imagine closing your eyes here and still knowing where you are, because the place is less about sight now than sensation, coolness, weight, space, a long, downward calm held beneath the coast. The Big Sur kelp forest remains in the story because nothing that nourishes a place truly disappears from it. The kelp's growth began in sunlight and cold upwelled water. Its blades sheltered fish and softened waves. Its fragments fed the reef and slope. Its dissolved matter entered currents, microbes, and sediments. We have followed that continuity down through the water, and now it rests with us in this dim receiving layer. It is enough to know the forest is above, still swaying, while its quiet gifts settle here. The bed of sediment below us looks almost motionless, but it is part of a long descent that has been happening for ages. Fine material from cliffs, rivers, shells, plankton, and kelp all finds its way into the sea's lower places. Some is moved again by storms or currents. Some is buried. Some becomes habitat. Some becomes a chemical trace in the dark. The ocean floor is not simply where things stop. It is where slow transformations become almost indistinguishable from stillness. We allow ourselves to drift just a little farther along the bottom, following the faintest incline. The water is dark enough now that we travel by feeling more than sight. A soft pressure surrounds you. The temperature remains cool and constant. The sound is a hush so complete that even imagined words seem to arrive wrapped in cloth. If sleep is near, it can come in the same way the sediment settles, without announcement, without effort, with only the gentlest downward motion. Far above, the kelp blades continue their patient swaying in the Big Sur swell. and perhaps moonlight or late daylight touches the surface, depending on the hour in your room. Down here, that distinction no longer matters. Day and night are softened by depth. The forest's canopy may brighten or dim, the shore may warm or cool, the wind may move through cliff grasses, and still this lower water remains calm. It receives the changes from above slowly. After the edges have been rounded away, a final visible fleck of kelp turns in the water ahead of us, sinking with a motion so unhurried it seems suspended between falling and floating. It passes through the faint blue around us, lowers toward the sediment, and comes to rest without stirring more than a small breath of grains. We do not need to follow it further than that. It has arrived in the quiet. It will change here, gradually, invisibly, and the bottom will make room for it, as it makes room for everything that comes down softly. And as we remain with that settled fragment, the deeper plain opens wider beyond it, and the calm continues downward into the dark. The dark below the settled fragment is not a wall, but a widening, a slow invitation into water that no longer needs the surface to define it. We drift just above the bottom, where the sediment keeps its pale, muted tone for a little while longer, and the faintest blue light still gathers in shallow hollows. The Big Sur Kelp forest is now far above us, yet the memory of its swaying canopy remains like a gentle motion inside the mind. Even here, where the forest itself cannot grow, its quiet influence continues to fall around us. You may feel that influence as a kind of distant shelter, though there are no blades overhead now. A forest can shelter by feeding, by shading, by slowing water, and by making a world that extends beyond its visible stems. The kelp above did all of that in its sunlit layer, and then it sent pieces of itself outward and downward into the dim spaces where we are resting. The ocean does not separate gift from distance. It lets what was gathered in brightness become useful in dark water, slowly and without ceremony. The seafloor beneath us appears almost smooth. But if we let our attention soften rather than sharpen, small variations begin to appear. A faint rise, a small pit, a subtle change in grain size, where heavier sand gives way to finer silt. These are not dramatic features, yet they make a landscape for the creatures who live close to the bottom. To a burrowing worm, a slight firmness matters. To a small clam, the flow of water through sediment matters. To a resting fish, even a shallow depression can become shelter. We drift over these tiny forms as if reading a page written in low relief. The current moves from our left to our right, or perhaps it only seems that way because the falling particles lean together for a while. Each speck carries some history from above. Some may come from plankton that bloomed in cold, upwelled water. Some may come from the frayed edge of a kelp blade near the Big Sur canopy. Some may be mineral dust from the rugged coast, carried out by runoff and time. All of it lowers into one calm. There is a hush here that feels older than silence, though of course the sea is never truly silent. It trembles with distant motion, with small pulses of pressure, with the hidden activity of animals, and with the continuous soft rain through the water. But to us, drifting slowly, it becomes a single broad quiet. You can let it fill the spaces between thoughts. You can let the thought of the kelp forest above become less like a picture and more like a feeling, a green gold swaying far overhead. A small brittle star moves across the sediment, barely lifting its body as its arms make slow, searching curves. Its motion is delicate, almost written rather than walked, and the track it leaves will not last. Nearby, a dark little opening in the seafloor, may be the entrance to a burrow, a private room below the visible world. We do not look inside. Some places are peaceful because they remain hidden. The ocean floor is full of such private interiors, and our passing does not need to disturb them. The science of this lower place is patient science. Organic matter settles, bacteria break it down, animals feed, burrows mix the sediment, and dissolved substances move between water and seabed. Each exchange is small, but together they shape the chemistry of the bottom. Oxygen enters where water can reach. Nutrients return to the water where decay releases them. The seafloor is not separate from the sea above it. It is a breathing boundary, and we are floating just over that breath. You may imagine the upper Big Sur kelp forest breathing in another way, taking in light, carbon dioxide and nutrients, building long tissues that sway in the current. Down here, that building has become unbuilding, but not in a sad sense. It is a return. The kelp's form loosens into smaller forms. Its stored energy becomes many quiet meals. Its body becomes part of sediment, water, and animal life. The whole descent has been an education in gentleness, if we let it be. Nothing bright has been wasted. The temperature remains cool enough to keep every motion slow. The water rests along your arms with an even pressure, and the imagined chill becomes soothing because it is steady. There is no sharp wind here, no glare, no dry sound. Only the dim salt world, the soft bottom, and the faint drift of particles between us and the last light above. If your body in bed feels warm, the contrast may be comforting. If the room is dark, it can join this darkness without effort. We pass a place where the sediment changes color slightly, a gray-brown patch among paler grains. It may hold more organic matter, perhaps the remains of kelp fragments that settled here days or weeks ago, softened beyond recognition. Small animals may have worked through it already, taking what they could use and leaving finer material behind. The patch has no clear edge. It fades into the surrounding floor, the way a memory fades into mood. The Big Sur kelp forest is present here as a tone rather than a shape. And as we move beyond that darker patch, the bottom slopes into an even broader quiet, where the signs of life become smaller and the feeling of depth becomes more complete. The broader quiet beneath us carries fewer visible marks, but it is not vacant. It is simply less insistent, and you may find that your attention no longer needs many objects to remain calm. The water itself becomes enough. The faint blue dimness becomes enough. The slow pressure of depth, the coolness against the skin, the marine snow falling grain by grain, all of it begins to hold the mind in place. We are still connected to the Big Sur kelp forest above, but now that connection is nearly dreamlike. A tiny shrimp-like animal darts from one bit of shelter to another, and then all motion seems to vanish again. The speed of that one movement might have felt sudden near the surface, but down here it is softened by distance and scale. It disappears so quickly into the quiet that it leaves no wake in the mind. You may notice how the ocean absorbs small changes without losing its calm. A creature moves, a particle falls, a current shifts, and the larger hush remains unbroken. The bottom shows a shallow furrow, perhaps made by something dragging lightly across the surface. It curves, fades, and disappears where the sediment has been smoothed. If we followed it, we might find nothing at the end, and that would be all right. Not every path needs a revealed maker. Some traces are restful because they point to life without requiring a story. The seafloor offers many such hints, and we pass them with the same gentle attention we gave the kelp blades above. In the Big Sur kelp forest, the most visible motion came from swaying stipes and long leaves lifting toward the sun. Here, the most important motion may be almost invisible. Water moves through sediment. Molecules diffuse across gradients. Bacteria divide. Tiny animals feed beneath the surface. A buried clam draws water inward and releases it again. The scale has changed, but the rhythm remains one of exchange. We have descended from visible waving to hidden breathing, and both belong to the same sea. You may feel the descent inside your own awareness now. Earlier there were more images to hold. The canopy, the fish, the rocks, the fallen kelp. Now the images are fewer, and each one lasts longer. A ripple in sand, a pale shell, a faint track, a dark fragment settling. This is how sleep simplifies the world too. It does not erase everything at once. It lets the bright details loosen until only the deeper rhythm remains. And the deeper rhythm is enough to carry you. A sea pen stands ahead, slender and pale, anchored in the sediment like a soft feather rising into the current. We approach slowly, leaving plenty of distance, and watch its small polyps opened to the passing water. Each polyp is an animal, and together they make the larger form. a quiet colony, living by the fine matter the sea delivers. There is a lovely patience in that arrangement. Many small mouths, one shared body, a life lifted just high enough from the bottom to receive what drifts by. The current bends the sea pen gently, and then it returns, not rigid, not limp, but responsive. It reminds us again of the kelp above, though on a smaller, dimmer scale. The giant kelp bends in swell and lifts toward light. The sea pen bends in current and waits for food. Both live by yielding. Both make a shape in moving water. Both belong to landscapes that appear still only when we have forgotten how much quiet motion sustains them. The sediment around the sea pen is marked by tiny pits and low mounds. These small features may be made by worms, burrowing crustaceans, or the slow settling of particles in uneven flow. You do not need to sort them all. It is enough to feel the bottom as a living surface, gently worked and reworked. The way it changes is slower than thought, and so it invites thought to slow with it. We hover there a moment, and the blue darkness seems to deepen without becoming heavier. Above this dim plain, the Big Sur Kelp forest continues to make oxygen, shelter, and shade when the day is bright. Storms may pass over it, fog may move along the coast, Sunday may strike the cliffs and warm the land above the cold Pacific. Down here, those surface moods arrive only as faint consequences, softened by distance. The depth translates everything into patience. Even weather becomes a delayed whisper. Even light becomes a memory. Even the forest becomes a falling, feeding presence. We drift on, and the sea pen fades behind us. The bottom remains close, but does not rise to meet us. We keep a little space between ourselves and the sediment, because the calm depends on leaving what has settled undisturbed. That small distance feels respectful. It also feels restful, as though we are lying just above sleep, close enough to enter, but not needing to force the crossing. The water carries us, and the current decides the pace. And as the current carries us farther from the visible forest, the Big Sur slope becomes a soft blue corridor, leading down through colder, quieter water. The corridor is not a canyon with walls, but a feeling of direction shaped by slope, current, and deepening light. The seafloor angles gently beneath us, and the water seems to guide us along it. You can sense the coast above in the incline, because land and sea are joined here by geology, erosion, and gravity. Rock loosened from cliffs can enter streams, shorelines, and the sea. Shells break, kelp falls, plankton settles. The bottom gathers these things quietly, making a record no single eye can read all at once. We are still in the wider influence of the Big Sur Kelp forest. Though the kelp itself is far above the reach of our sight, the forest's living canopy belongs to shallower water, where sunlight can support its growth. Down here, we receive what the canopy releases. This difference is not separation, only layering. A mountain has summit, slope, meadow, and valley. A kelp forest has canopy, midwater, reef, margin, and receiving floor. We have been moving through those layers in the slow order the ocean gives them. The water darkens toward a deeper blue, and the particles falling through it appear brighter by contrast. They come and go like tiny lanterns that never flare, only glimmer once and continue downward. Some are too small to see until they cross a faint path of light. Others pass as pale flecks, turning gently. You may imagine that each one has traveled a different path through the living sea. Together, they form a soft, continuous descent, a rain without weather, a snowfall without cold air. A low swell of current moves along the bottom, and the sediment lifts in a thin veil. It does not cloud the whole scene. It only softens the lower edge of our view, blurring the boundary between water and floor. For a moment, the seafloor seems to breathe upward. Then the veil settles. The boundary returns. You may notice how restful repeated settling can be. Again and again, the world rises a little, and again, it lays itself down. The animals here are adapted to those small uncertainties. A burrow may need repair after sediment shifts. A feeding structure may open when the water clears. A tiny scavenger may emerge after a fragment lands. Life is not separate from change, but neither is it overwhelmed by change. It works with what comes. In the deepening margin below the Big Sur Kelp forest, the pace of adjustment is quiet enough that it feels like stillness from a distance. Close up, it is a patient intelligence spread through many bodies. We pass another fragment of kelp, older than the last, darkened and softened until its blade has lost the firm edges it once held in the canopy. It lies partly covered by silt, and small animals have opened tiny windows in its surface. This fragment once lifted toward the sun, swaying high in the forest, surrounded by fish and filtered light. Now it rests near the bottom, giving itself slowly to a different community. The same body has belonged to brightness and shadow, movement and stillness, height and depth. That thought can settle gently into you. A life, a day, a feeling can change layers without becoming meaningless. What was active can become restful. What was visible can become hidden. What was held upright can come down and still be part of the whole. The ocean shows this without speech, through kelp and sediment, through falling matter and patient animals. We do not need to turn it into a lesson. We can simply let the pattern soothe us. The pressure around us is now more noticeable in the imagination, not as force, but as completeness. Water surrounds every side of the body with equal calm. There is no single direction from which it comes. It is above, below, beside and around, holding all surfaces evenly. This evenness can feel deeply reassuring. The world at the surface often comes at us from angles, with noises, lights, obligations and interruptions. Down here, sensation is unified. The sea is one cool presence. The Big Sur coast has a reputation for cliffs, surf, fog, and dramatic meeting places between land and water. But beneath that outward drama lies this subdued continuation. The kelp forest is part of it, not as decoration, but as a living expression of cold water and rocky ground. Its presence softens the shore's energy, shelters life, and sends food into lower places. The farther we descend, the more we understand that a landscape's quietest work may happen beyond the place most easily seen. A fish moves close to the bottom ahead of us, its body low, its colors hidden by depth. It pauses near a depression, then slips away. The movement is unhurried, and after it passes, the sand seems to close over the event. You can let your mind do the same with whatever small images rise there. Notice them, let them pass, and allow the quiet surface to return. We keep drifting, and the corridor of blue dimness continues. And as the seafloor grows smoother still, the last textured memories of reef and holdfast fade into a low plain where only subtle signs remain. The low plain beneath us is a place of subtle signs, and the Big Sur kelp forest above is now present mostly through the slow fall of matter and the shape of our memory. The sediment stretches ahead in gentle undulations, not flat enough to be empty, not rough enough to break the calm. Faint ridges show where bottom currents have passed. Shallow hollows hold darker material. A few tiny openings mark hidden lives, each one a doorway no larger than a thought. You may feel the body letting go of the need to identify everything. Earlier, we named kelp, holdfast, rockfish, anemone, urchin, sand, and current, and those names helped us enter the landscape. Now the names can soften. A mark can be only a mark. A shadow can be only a shadow. A falling speck can be only a falling speck. Sleep does not need a complete catalogue. It needs rhythm, safety, and a world that asks for nothing sudden. The water's color has become difficult to separate from darkness. It is still blue somewhere inside itself, but the blue is deep and low, a color felt more than seen. The sediment below returns a faint light, enough to keep the bottom from disappearing entirely. We move through that near darkness with a calm pace, as though the ocean has slowed the hour. You might imagine your room around you dimming too, not by losing reality, but by sharing its edges with this underwater quiet. At the surface, the kelp canopy moves with each swell, and its blades may touch air when the tide and waves lift them high enough. Here, air is only a memory carried in your body. Every sound has been filtered through water. Every movement is softened by resistance. Every direction is rounded, The Big Sur Kelp forest began as a place of living vertical lines, but now those lines have dissolved into the broad horizontal rest of the bottom. The descent has changed the geometry of the mind. A small cluster of worm tubes rises from the sediment, pale and fragile. Their openings face the current, and perhaps delicate feeding structures extend for a while, then withdraw when the water changes. You can imagine their patience without needing to see every detail. A worm in a tube lives by trusting the passing sea. It builds a small dwelling and receives what the current brings. There is a quiet dignity in that, a way of being rooted in softness rather than stone. The science of sediment tells us that bottoms like this are archives and habitats at once. Grains accumulate from many sources, and the order of layers can preserve traces of past conditions. Yet living animals constantly stir and mix the upper sediments, blurring the record as they make the bottom livable. The archive is not locked away. It is breathed through, eaten through, tunneled through, and changed by life. This makes the seafloor feel less like a storage place and more like a sleeping body. We drift low enough now that the smallest current near the bottom matters to our view. When it strengthens, particles slide along just above the sediment. When it eases, they fall. Some settle into tiny depressions. Some catch against shell fragments. Some disappear into burrow openings, drawn down by unseen animals or by the movement of water through the grains. The entire floor is receiving. The Big Sur Kelp forest sends its faint offerings downward, and the bottom accepts them without sound. You may notice how little effort is needed to remain with this scene. Nothing asks you to anticipate. Nothing rushes toward you. The darkness does not hide danger in this telling. It hides rest, privacy, and the long patience of natural processes. Your breathing can become part of the pace. Inhale softly, if you happen to notice. Exhale without emphasis. Let the imagined water take the edges from each breath until the rhythm feels older than thought. A pale shell lies ahead, curved like a small cup, holding a pinch of darker sediment. We pass slowly above it, and for a moment it becomes the center of the whole lower world. Then it slips behind us, and the plain opens again. This is how attention moves when it is nearly asleep. One simple object becomes complete, then releases you. Another may appear, or none may appear, and both are equally acceptable. The ocean does not mind if you stop following. The Big Sur underwater slope continues into greater depths beyond our present view, toward canyons, basins, and plains where the sea becomes colder, darker, and more remote. We do not need to reach all of them now. We only follow the downward feeling far enough to let the upper world grow quiet. The kelp forest has served as our guide, first in its visible beauty, then in its falling fragments, and now in the way its presence lingers after sight has let it go. And as the shell disappears behind us, the sediment ahead grows softer in the dimness, and we keep descending through the slow, blue-black hush. The blue-black hush around us seems to absorb even the idea of distance. Near and far become less certain, because the darkness gives few edges for the eye to measure. The bottom is close, then not close. A particle is bright, then gone. A low ripple appears, then blends into the next. You are not lost here, because we are moving gently together. But the usual sharp map of the world has softened. This softening is part of the descent, and it can be deeply restful. The Big Sur Kelp forest is now a far upper layer in the mind, and perhaps you can still picture it if you wish. The canopy lifts and bows in the swell. Fish turn beneath it. Otters rest in floating ribbons near the surface. The rocky reef holds fast to the coast. Then the image grows dimmer, and the fragments descend through blue water toward us. We are not abandoning that forest. We are listening to the quiet continuation of its life far below. A faint mound rises from the sediment below, and at its top a small opening darkens the surface. The mound may be the work of a burrowing animal that carries grains upward while shaping its hidden space. Such animals change the seafloor one small movement at a time. They bring buried material up. They draw oxygenated water down. They make the sediment more varied than it first appears. In their patient labor, the bottom becomes less like a sealed surface and more like a porous, breathing world. We pass over the mound without stirring it. The opening remains dark, private, undisturbed. There is a profound gentleness in leaving hidden things hidden. Not everything needs to be illuminated. Not every depth needs to be entered. The ocean itself seems to understand this, keeping much of its life beneath sand, within crevices, under blades, or beyond the reach of light. You can carry that permission into rest. Parts of you may remain unexamined tonight and still be held. The water here has the clean scent of nothing dry, if scent can be imagined underwater at all. It is salt, mineral, cold, and distant from leaves, soil, smoke, and streets. Yet through the falling kelp, there is still a trace of plant life, a memory of green growth in the upper sea. Giant kelp is not a plant in the strict botanical sense, but in the feeling of the landscape, it offers that same sheltering vertical abundance. It makes the underwater coast feel forested, though its body is algae and its roots are not roots. The holdfasts above do not draw nourishment from the rock, but they grip with extraordinary persistence. From them stipes rise and blades spread, gathering sunlight and dissolved nutrients from the moving water. That simple arrangement creates habitat on a grand scale. You can imagine it now as a shadowed architecture above our heads, a living structure made possible by cold water, hard substrate, and light. The deeper plane receives the aftermath of that architecture, and the aftermath is full of quiet life. A tiny animal crosses a kelp fragment below us, its legs moving quickly, but its progress very small. The fragment barely shifts beneath it. Around the edges, the tissue has become ragged and translucent. Soon it will no longer look like kelp at all. The sea breaks forms down patiently, and the patience is almost tender. It does not erase in a single motion. It softens, opens, shares, and disperses. We watch that dispersal without needing to hold the original shape too tightly. The same pattern happens in the body before sleep. The day's forms begin sharply, with tasks, conversations, images, and intentions. Then evening comes and they soften. Some pieces remain bright for a while. Others drift down and become part of a deeper, quieter processing. By the time sleep nears, the day may no longer be a sequence of events, but a sediment of feelings. The sea below Big Sur understands that kind of settling better than any words can say. We continue through the hush, and the marine snow grows sparse for a while. Perhaps the current has shifted, or perhaps the particles are simply harder to see in the darker water. The absence makes the remaining specks more precious. One appears above us, sinks past, and vanishes below. Another glimmers near the edge of sight. Each one moves at its own pace, but all are carried by the same surrounding sea. You may feel the mind following one speck until it disappears, then resting in the space after it. And as that space widens, the lower slope becomes almost dreamlike, a place where the Big Sur coast is remembered only through cold water and falling light. The dreamlike slope has no need for strong outlines. It is made of gradients, from dim to darker, from sand to silt, from visible to imagined. We drift within those gradients, and the descent becomes smoother than thought. The Big Sur Kelp forest is now far enough above that its name feels like a quiet anchor, something we can return to without climbing back toward it. It reminds us where this journey began, in the coastal forest of swaying brown gold blades, and it lets us understand the darkness as part of that same living place. A soft depression opens below us, broad and shallow, its edges barely raised. Fine particles have gathered in it, making the center slightly darker than the surrounding bottom. Small depressions like this can catch food, shells, and drifting matter, becoming temporary pockets of richness. A bit of kelp rests there, almost flat, its edge lifting when the current passes. We hover near it, watching the blade rise and fall so slightly that the motion seems to happen inside the stillness rather than against it. This is the kind of movement that helps the mind release. Not a wave breaking, not a fish darting, not a sudden change, but a repeated, nearly silent lifting and settling. The kelp fragment moves because the water moves. The water moves because distant forces act across the sea. The sea moves because the planet turns, winds blow, tides pull, and heat shifts through the atmosphere. Yet here, all those large forces arrive as one small edge of kelp breathing against the bottom. You can let the scale of that be comforting. Vast things do not always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive as a faint current in a dark place, as a slow bend in a sea pen, as the settling of grains around a shell. Big Sur's cliffs, the Pacific's weather, the moon's pull, the chemistry of cold upwelling water, and the growth of giant kelp all meet in small, quiet consequences below us. The world does not need to become simple to become soothing. It only needs to be felt slowly. A few small scavengers gather at the darker edge of the kelp fragment. They are difficult to see, more motion than form, and their work is humble. They take what has fallen. They begin the process of return. Each tiny mouth is part of a long descent from sunlight into sediment. If you were fully awake, you might want to study them closely. But here, as sleep nears, it is enough to know they are there, quietly transforming the forest's fallen body into life at the bottom. The water is almost without color now. It has a blue-black softness, and the bottom is a gray suggestion beneath us. Your body in the imagined sea feels unhurried, suspended and safe in the gentle fiction of this descent. The real body can remain still, perhaps under blankets, perhaps hearing only the voice and the room's low quiet. We keep the ocean's pace. We do not startle the scene. We do not turn upward. We continue, because continuing downward has become as natural as exhaling. The sediment shows a fine pattern where very small currents have combed it into narrow ridges. These ridges are so low that a fingertip could smooth them, yet the sea makes and remakes them with immense patience. You can picture water passing over grains again and again, each pass moving almost nothing, until almost nothing becomes a pattern. Many peaceful changes happen this way. A little less tension with each breath, a little more darkness behind the eyes, a little more distance from the bright surface of the day. The Big Sur kelp forest above also grows by accumulations that can seem miraculous when viewed after the fact. A blade lengthens, a stipe rises, a holdfast thickens, a canopy spreads, fish arrive, invertebrates shelter, otters forage, detritus falls. None of these alone is the whole forest, but together they make the living landscape we entered at the beginning. Down here, the sediment accumulates its own forest of traces, less visible, more horizontal, but still shaped by countless small arrivals. We drift beyond the depression, leaving the kelp fragment to its slow return. The bottom smooths again, the current steadies, the marine snow becomes more even, falling through the dark water like the softest possible weather. You may feel yourself held between two rests, the rest of the seafloor below and the rest of sleep approaching from within. There is no need to choose. They are part of the same downward feeling now, both quiet, both patient, both asking nothing. And as the falling particles thicken again, the lower water becomes a deepened night, and we move through it with the slow patience of the sea. The deepened night around us is gentle because it has no edge. It does not arrive suddenly. It has been gathering through every layer of the descent, from the bright surface above the Big Sur kelp forest to the dim plain beneath us now. At first, the darkness lived between kelp blades. Then it rested under rocks. Then it spread across sand. Now it is the main body of the water, and we are floating inside it, as if inside a long, quiet thought. You can still sense the direction of the bottom, though it is not sharply visible. The slope continues downward, and the sediment remains close enough to anchor us. Without that bottom, the darkness might feel too wide, but with it, the scene stays calm and grounded. A seafloor, even a dim one, gives the mind a place to rest. We are not suspended in emptiness. We are moving over a living, receiving surface, one that has gathered the coast's quiet offerings for a very long time. The Big Sur coast above may be wrapped in fog now, or touched by late sun, or lying under stars, but down here, those differences have softened into the same low blue darkness. The kelp canopy may still sway near the surface, its blades rubbing gently against one another as swell passes through. Small fish may tuck into shelter, urchins may graze, otters may turn in sleep at the edge of the forest. All of that continues without needing our attention, and there is comfort in letting a beautiful place continue unseen. A faint line of darker sediment appears ahead, perhaps where organic material has gathered along a subtle current path. We follow it for a while, not because it leads anywhere important, but because following a soft line can be restful. The line curves and fades. It reappears beside a shallow ripple, then disappears into the plain. This is enough of a path for us. In sleep too, paths are rarely straight. One image leads to another, then dissolves, and the mind keeps moving without needing a map. The water's coldness is steady enough now that it becomes almost neutral, a background of calm rather than a sensation that calls attention to itself. Pressure, too, has become part of the world, not something separate from it. The body feels enclosed, but not confined, supported, but not lifted, quieted, but not erased. These distinctions are soft, and they do not need to be examined. The ocean holds them all at once, in the same way it holds sand, kelp, fish, stone, darkness, and falling snow. A tiny shell fragment turns in the current just above the bottom, then settles into a shallow groove. Its pale edge catches the last possible light. For a moment, it looks almost luminous, though it is only reflecting what little remains. Then the angle changes, and it becomes part of the sediment again. Many things shine only briefly down here. That briefness makes them no less beautiful. It makes them easier to release. The deeper we go, the more the Big Sur kelp forest becomes a source rather than a seam. It is the upper system that gathered sunlight and turned it into living structure. It is the coastal forest that slowed water, sheltered animals, and sent organic matter down the slope. It is the green-brown canopy we can return to in memory whenever the darkness grows too simple. Yet the darkness is not a departure from it. It is the continuation of the forest's story after visible form has softened. You may imagine the holdfasts above gripping rock in the surge. They are intricate, branching masses, not true roots, but anchors strong enough to hold the long kelp bodies in moving water. Around them, small creatures shelter in chambers of living structure. Higher up, gas bladders lift blades toward the sun. Higher still, the canopy spreads across the surface like a floating roof. That whole vertical world remains suspended above our quiet plain, linked to us by current, sinking fragments, and the slow downward pull of matter. Here below, the sediment receives without preference. A plankton shell, a grain of rock, a bit of kelp, a scale, a tiny pellet of waste, a fragment of sponge, each can become part of the uppermost layer. Some will be eaten, some will dissolve, some will be buried. The bottom does not sort them according to our ideas of importance. It works by contact, chemistry, time, and the small appetites of living things. This impartial receiving can feel peaceful, as though everything has a place when it comes to rest. We drift onward, and the dark line of sediment disappears behind us. The marine snow continues. A few specks pass close to our imagined faces, and then they are gone. If your eyes are closed, perhaps you see them anyway, tiny pale points crossing a soft field of blue-black. They do not need to become anything more. Their falling is the image. Their falling is the rhythm. Their falling is the quiet path we follow. And, as we follow that path, the bottom becomes smoother still, and the deep water below Big Sur carries us toward an even slower layer of darkness. The slower layer of darkness feels less like a place we enter and more like a pace we accept. The seafloor remains beneath us, but it no longer offers many features to interrupt the drift. We pass over shallow ripples, then over a smooth patch, then over a scatter of tiny pale flecks that might be shell, mineral, or old biological remains. The water between us and the bottom is clear enough to see, yet dim enough to soften every outline. You can rest in that balance. The Big Sur kelp forest, high above, belongs to a brighter pace. Blades lengthen quickly when nutrients and light are abundant. Fish come and go through the canopy. Waves pull the fronds in long arcs. Near the surface, things move with the visible rhythm of swell and day. Down here, time seems to stretch. Growth is slower to notice. Feeding is quieter. Change is more easily mistaken for stillness. We do not need to compare them. Both paces belong to the same coastline. A small cluster of pale tubes rises from the sediment, angled slightly in the same direction, shaped by the current that passes over them. Their builders may be hidden inside, soft bodies protected by delicate structures. The tubes are fragile, but they persist because the sea around them is often gentle enough. When the current brings food, they feed. When it shifts, they wait. A life can be very small and still perfectly fitted to its circumstances. That thought, like the tubes themselves, can stand quietly in the mind. The bottom current carries a faint scent of organic richness in the imagination, though actual scent underwater is a matter for creatures better suited than we are. Crabs, fish, and many invertebrates read the water through chemistry. They know traces, gradients, and signals we would miss entirely. The fallen kelp from the Big Sur kelp forest would not be anonymous to them. It would be a message in the water, a food source, a place to investigate. What looks quiet to us may be full of invitations to them. We pass above an area where tiny holes pattern the sediment more densely. It might be a place of active burrowing, a small community hidden beneath the surface. The holes are dark, round, and still. No animal appears, and that is fine. The scene does not need revelation. You can simply know that beneath the smoothness, there are passages and chambers, soft bodies moving in darkness, water being drawn through grains, the bottom made alive by lives that prefer not to be seen. This hidden activity gives the plane a special kind of warmth, even in cold water. Not physical warmth, but the warmth of knowing that the darkness is inhabited. A quiet room feels different when someone is sleeping peacefully nearby. A forest feels different when birds are tucked into leaves. A seafloor feels different when birds are tucked into leaves. A seafloor feels different when birds are tucked into leaves. A seafloor feels different when birds are tucked into leaves. A seafloor feels our passages. It moves under sky. It receives rain and fog. It reflects cliffs and passing clouds. It covers the Big Sur kelp forest, where blades press upward and float just beneath or at the waterline. That surface world does not vanish because we are deep. It simply grows quiet enough to stop calling us back. We can let it remain above us, complete and distant. A gentle slope continues, and the sediment becomes finer. Fine sediment remembers still water more easily than coarse sand, because it settles where motion is weaker. Its presence tells us something about the calm of this layer, about the way energy has softened with depth and distance from breaking waves. The seafloor here is made by what can remain. Fine particles settle out only when the water allows them to. In that sense, the bottom is a record of quiet conditions, written in softness. You may find your thoughts settling under the same rule. The more the inner weather calms, the finer things can come to rest. Small feelings that were held in motion all day can lower into place. Unfinished images can soften into dream. The mind does not need to solve them before sleep. Like sediment, they can be received by a deeper layer and worked on slowly, without the surface self watching every motion. We drift beside a small mound where something beneath the surface has pushed sediment upward. A few particles roll down its side and stop. The mound is simple, almost nothing, but it interrupts the plane enough to hold our attention for a breath. Then we pass, and it becomes part of the dimness behind us. The sea keeps offering these small temporary centers, and then it lets them go. We can do the same, and as the fine sediment grows more continuous, the influence of the Big Sur kelp forest becomes a soft, distant rhythm rather than an image. That distant rhythm is made of swaying, falling, feeding, and returning. It began in the Canopy, where giant kelp lifted itself toward light with the help of buoyant floats, and it continues here, where tiny particles settle into a darker world. The Big Sur kelp forest is both above us and within the movement around us. We have followed its material, its sheltering influence, and its quiet connection to the wider coast. Now we let the rhythm remain without needing to picture every part. The bottom is dim enough that the eye might close naturally. If your eyes are already closed, the scene can continue as sensation. Cool water, a soft downward drift, a broad plain below, particles falling past, the faint memory of kelp moving high overhead. These are enough to hold the journey. The narration can become like current, present but unhurried, guiding without tugging. You can float with it, letting attention thin and widen, as if it too were dissolving into the sea. A low shape appears on the seafloor, perhaps a sponge-covered stone almost buried in sediment. We approach slowly, and the shape gains texture. Its surface is uneven, with small openings and encrusting life clinging where sand has not covered it. This little hard place in the soft plains supports a different community than the surrounding sediment. A few animals need something firm. The stone provides it. Once again, the ocean's diversity begins with a small difference in surface and flow. We pause beside the stone and notice how the current divides around it. On the upstream side, particles strike and lift. On the downstream side, a tiny area of calmer water forms, and finer material gathers there. The stone shapes the current, and the current shapes the sediment, and the sediment shapes who can live nearby. This is ecology in its quietest visible form, a chain of gentle consequences. You do not need to hold it as information. You can feel it as order. The order is not rigid. If a storm above sends stronger swell downward, the sediment may shift. If a large fragment of kelp lands nearby, scavengers may gather. If the stone is buried deeper, one community may fade and another may take its place. Stability here includes change. That is one of the sea's softer teachings. Rest does not mean nothing ever moves. Rest can mean that movement has found a rhythm broad enough to hold it. We leave the stone behind, and the plain returns. The water is darker ahead, and our descent continues with the same slow, steady pace. The Big Sur kelp forest is now like a lullaby, remembered from another room, its tones carried down through current and falling matter. You may not hear the exact melody, but you know it is there. The forest sways, the particles fall, the bottom receives, and we move gently through the space between. The marine snow thickens again, and each speck becomes a small measure of descent. Some fall from above us, some drift beside us, some seem to rise when the current changes, though their longer journey is downward. This complexity does not disturb the calm. It makes the water feel alive in every direction. You are surrounded by slow travel. Nothing is fixed, yet nothing is hurried. The whole scene becomes a soft suspension between movement and rest. A buried animal releases another faint puff from the bottom, and the cloud spreads like milk in dark water before thinning into nothing. We watch it dissolve. Dissolving is a beautiful word for this layer, because so many edges are doing just that. The edge between forest and slope, the edge between fragment and sediment, the edge between waking and sleeping, the edge between what you can see and what you can only feel. Down here, edges do not vanish abruptly. They loosen until they no longer need to be defended. The cold water and the darkness make a chamber of calm around us. It is not a room with walls, but it has the intimacy of one, because attention has narrowed to a few soft sensations. The seafloor below, the particles falling, the guide's voice moving slowly with you. The far-off kelp forest above Big Sur. If sleep has begun to take parts of this away, that is all right. The descent can continue, whether you follow every word or only the rhythm beneath the words. And as we pass through the dissolving edges, the lower plain stretches on, receiving the quiet rain from the forest and the wider sea. The receiving plain stretches beyond our sight, and the darkness gives it no clear horizon. This lack of horizon feels peaceful now, because we are not trying to reach an end. We are only continuing. The bottom accepts each falling particle, and the water accepts each quiet movement, and you can let your own attention be accepted in the same way. The Big Sur kelp forest above remains part of the descent, even here, as a source of matter, shade, shelter, and remembered motion. A few tiny organisms live in the water itself, too small to hold our focus for long. Planktonic forms, larvae and drifting life stages may pass through layers before settling, feeding, or being eaten. Some animals that live fixed to the bottom begin life as small bodies carried by currents. The sea uses drift as a beginning. A larva can travel before it anchors. A spore can move before it grows. Kelp itself releases reproductive cells into moving water, trusting currents, timing, and chance in the quiet way marine life often does. This drifting beginning belongs to the Big Sur kelp forest, as much as to the deeper plane. New kelp does not walk to a rock. It arrives through the water, microscopic and easily missed, then settles where light, chemistry, and surface allow. From that small beginning, a giant kelp plant may rise many body lengths toward the surface, becoming shelter for fish and shade for the reef. The thought is calming in its scale. Great underwater forests begin with small arrivals, almost invisible, received by stone. Down here, small arrivals continue. A particle lands, a lava searches, a grain shifts, a burrow opens. Each event is quiet, but the seafloor is made of such events. If your mind is close to sleep, it may not separate them anymore. They become a soft continuity, like rain on a roof heard from a warm room. The details matter, but they do not require effort. They can continue without being held. We glide through a stretch where the bottom is marked by long, low ripples, aligned with a current that may have been stronger earlier. The ridges are smooth and evenly spaced, each one casting a shadow too faint to be called a shadow. They give the plane a gentle rhythm, and we move across them as though crossing slow waves made solid. The sensation is almost rocking. Ridge, trough, and the mind follows until counting is no longer necessary. The color of the sediment shifts again, a little darker in the troughs where finer material has gathered. These subtle differences show how motion sorts the bottom, placing grains according to weight, size, and flow. The ocean is always arranging and rearranging, even when it appears still. It does not arrange with intention, but with laws so steady they can feel like care. Water moves, grains respond, patterns appear, living things use the patterns. The result is a calm order that no one had to design. A small dark fish rests near the base of one ripple, almost blending into the trough. Its body is still, its fins making tiny corrections. If it senses us, it does not flee. It holds close to the bottom, using the low shape of the sand as cover. You may feel a quiet kinship with that resting, the wish to be near a surface, supported by a small fold in the world. Sleep can be like that too, a place where you settle into the slight shelter available and need nothing more. The Big Sur kelp forest would be far brighter than this in daytime, but it too has shaded places where animals rest and reduce their movements. Under the canopy, light is broken and softened. Between holdfasts, crevices offer privacy. Within the sway of blades, fish find cover from the open water. The forest and the lower plain differ greatly, yet both provide ways to be less exposed. Above, shelter is vertical and living. Below, shelter is low, subtle, and made of sediment. We cross the last of the ripples, and the bottom smooths again. The current weakens. The marine snow falls more vertically. In the stiller water, each speck seems to take longer to move past us, as if the descent has entered an even slower measure of time. You can let your breathing settle into that measure. There is no need to make it deeper. Let it find the lower rhythm on its own, as the particles find their way toward the seafloor. And as the lower rhythm steadies, the darkness around us becomes spacious and soft, carrying the far memory of kelp into the deeper quiet. The spacious darkness carries us without shape for a while, and the bottom remains a gentle presence below. We are far from the first cool hush at the surface, far from the trembling silver light above the Big Sur kelp forest, yet the descent has been continuous, each layer handing us to the next. The forest did not end so much as become less visible. Its matter fell, its influence spread, and its memory traveled with us into the dark water. You may sense now that the ocean's calm is not emptiness, but allowance. It allows the kelp to grow upward. It allows waves to pass through the canopy. It allows animals to shelter, graze, filter, and drift. It allows fragments to fall and sediment to gather. It allows darkness to deepen without becoming hostile. In this allowance, there is a kind of rest that does not need to be explained. We are held inside it as we continue down the gentle slope. A pale speck lands on the seafloor and remains visible for a moment before blending with the grains around it. It may be biological, mineral, or both. It may be eaten, buried, or moved again. We will not know, And that is part of the peace. The deep sea keeps processes open-ended. Outcomes unfold beyond the frame of our watching. You can let your own unfinished thoughts be like that speck, placed gently into a larger process, no longer requiring your attention tonight. The water becomes darker beneath us, though we still hover near the bottom. The slope may lead toward deeper canyons, where sediments move in occasional flows, and where the landscape becomes more carved, more remote, and more hidden. But our motion remains soft, not drawn by drama, only by the same downward quiet that has guided us all along. The Big Sur Kelp forest is now a distant upper garden, and the plain below is its calm, shadowed receiving ground. A small hollow in the sediment holds a gathering of fine, dark material. It may be old organic matter, broken down beyond recognition. Around it, the bottom is faintly disturbed by the movements of tiny feeders. This is the ocean's slow kitchen, though even that word feels too busy. It is more like a resting place, where matter changes in its sleep. Complex bodies become simpler pieces. Simpler pieces become available again. Life continues by accepting these changes without hurry. We drift past the hollow, and the current carries a few particles from its edge. They lift, travel a short distance, and settle again. The movement is so small that it would be easy to miss, but now our attention has become soft enough to notice. A quiet mind can perceive quiet things. The descent has trained us for this, not through effort, but by removing brightness, noise, and speed until the smallest motions feel sufficient. The Big Sur coast above may be alive with wind in the trees, waves along rocks, and fog moving through canyons, but none of that reaches us directly. What reaches us is the cold water shaped by that coast, and the organic rain shaped by the kelp forest, plankton, and reef. Distance transforms energy into calm. By the time surface life arrives here, it has been softened, fragmented, and made slow. This is why the lower sea feels so kind to a tired mind. You may feel yourself nearing a place where the words matter less than the cadence. That is welcome here. The script can become like the marine snow, each sentence falling slowly, each image settling or drifting away. If you miss one, another comes gently. If you miss many, the ocean remains. We keep moving within the same quiet, and nothing important is lost by letting go of detail. The Big Sur Kelp forest still sways above, whether or not you picture every blade. Ahead, the bottom fades into darker water, and the slope seems to continue beyond sight. We do not hurry toward what cannot be seen. We move with the current, low and calm, over the fine sediment that receives the sea's slow offerings. The pressure is even. The cold is clean. The light is nearly gone. The falling particles continue their patient descent, and with them, we continue, lower and quieter, into the next soft reach of the dark Pacific. The next soft reach of the dark Pacific receives us without any change, sharp enough to name. The bottom remains close, smooth, and faintly rippled, and the falling particles continue to lower themselves through the blue-black water with the patience of things that have never needed to hurry. Far above, the Big Sur Kelp forest keeps swaying in its cold green light, but down here, its motion has become only a distant kindness, a slow rain of memory settling into the plain. We come to rest just above the sediment, where nothing presses for attention. A pale grain lies beside a darker thread of old kelp. A small shell fragment holds the last trace of dimness along one curved edge. The water is cold, even, and quiet around you, and the pressure feels like a soft hand laid over the world. There is no need to move farther now. The descent has become stillness. The seafloor receives what falls, grain by grain, blade by blade, year by year, and it does so without sound. You can rest with it here, beneath the cliffs and the canopy, beneath the green forest and the fading light, in the deep lower hush where the ocean keeps its slowest thoughts. Above us, the surface continues moving, but it no longer asks anything of you. Only the soft dark remains, and the quiet bottom holds you.